What's up everybody? Today we're going to talk about gain staging and a couple ways you can do it. Let's have a look. Okay, so gain staging is really important. It gets talked about a lot, there's a bit of confusion about it, and I'm going to demystify it here for you and give you some tips to help you get by. So gain staging is all about making sure that each element, be it a kick drum, snare, guitar, is at the optimal level to go into the next part of the audio chain, whether that's analog gear or whether that's a plug-in, or even if it's just a subgroup or an auxiliary, or down the line to your mix bus, to make sure that you're not hitting it too loud, creating distortion, digital clipping, getting those kind of artifacts we don't want, or too softly where we're bringing up a lot of the noise floor that maybe is in the recording if it wasn't recorded loud enough, and so on and so forth. So what I've got here is a track that's got acoustic drums recorded in a live room, electric guitars and electric bass, and I'm going to show you some of the ways that you can gain stage things to make sure that they're the right level to go into that next part of the chain. Now, looking at the waveforms here, we can see that some of them are quite tall, meaning the amplitude is really loud. They've got a loud peak level. Some of them are quite small, which perhaps means that they've got less of a loud peak level. And then when you get to sort of other instruments like string instruments, bass and guitar for example, you can see that the peak level isn't that drastic. The whole waveform is quite uniform, and that means that overall the RMS level, or the average level, is much louder because the peak is closer in volume to the trough, or the lowest part of the waveform. So let's have a quick listen, check out some of our peak volumes here and see what we can do about it. So, cool song, nicely recorded, but we've got a problem. Where our levels are sitting at the moment, just on our faders, we're clipping our mix bus or our master output. And that's kind of symbolic of if you'd routed all your tracks to your mix bus, where you needed to add mix bus compression, mix bus EQ, maybe some tape or some saturation, some things like that, you'd already be overdoing it. And we've got no EQ, no compression, no parallel compression, none of those processes that you do in the course of a mix that are also going to add level. So, going back to our arrangement view, let's have a look at some tools at our disposal. The first one, which is potentially a good tool for you to use for your gain staging, is clip gain. In Pro Tools, each clip has its own clip gain, the ability to raise or lower the gain of a track individually. So we can hold down a key command, which is Option, Control and Shift, and scroll up to raise it or down to lower it. And that's pretty handy because that solves our problem. It means that when we put a plug-in on here, let's say we want to compress our kick drum, but the recording was done a little bit too loud, we can lower this, then we can get the right level going into our compressor. That's also going to help us flow down the line to our mix bus. Cool. The reason I don't love this is twofold. One, the waveforms get really small. So in the scheme of a mix, if I've gone along and I've dipped everything by 5 or 6 dB or whatever, sometimes, in the case of like these toms for say, you can't even really see it anymore. You might be scanning through, think, oh, there's not much going on there, and you might miss something. So I like to leave the clip gain alone as much as I possibly can. The other reason that I do that, and this is the twofold part, is actually sometimes you might want to use this to draw in some automation so that you can hit the compressor more consistently at different times rather than just kind of blanketly turning it up or down. Number two, we could use a plugin. In Pro Tools, the plugin you would use is called Trim. Now, that's all well and good as long as you're not already clipping. I'll give you an example. At the moment, this kick drum here, we can solo up, is hitting around -6. -6.4. That means we've got 6.4 dBs of headroom. But just for argument's sake, I'm going to turn this up using clip gain up 7 dB. Now you'll see we've got a problem. This is simulating that it was recorded too loud. I've actually gone ahead and turned the wrong one up, but that's okay, same thing. So now you can see that it's actually clipping here. And that's a problem, because what that means is it's going to overload the input stage of this plugin, right? So even if I turn this on and I turn it down by 7 dB, so we go back to a healthy level, for sure it looks healthy on the meter, but with certain plugins, you're already overloading the input. Therefore, you're already distorting the sound before you even get this far. So this is a useful tip if you're not clipping, you've got healthy levels, but they're just a little bit too loud going into the next tool. You can use this and turn it down, that's great. If it's already clipping, you probably, this isn't the right way to do it. The other thing is it eats up one of your input slots, which may or may not be a problem. I'm not usually using all 10, I'm barely using more than 5, but some people, sometimes you need to do what you need to do and you might need that insert slot. So that's 1 and 2. They're good, but my favorite way of doing this is a little bit reminiscent of analog, especially if you've worked on an SSL console or you've seen a console like an inline console where there is a short fader and a long fader. And usually when you're recording, the short fader comes after the preamp, which is the gain, and that is your level going to tape or to Pro Tools. And then the long fader is purely just there for the monitoring when you hear it back. We can replicate that in the DAW, and we do it with groups. So one way that I might do this is I might say I've got 2 kick mics here. I'm going to create a group, Command Option Shift N. And now these are mono tracks, so I want a mono routing folder, and I'm going to label these kick. What I've got now is 2 gain stages. I can use this fader to manage the level, go into my overall output fader, which is what I would use in the mix. And I can put all of my plugins on this folder, meaning that I don't have to mess with the clip gain. I don't have to use trim plugins, because now my gain staging for my kick can be done with these faders. And that's useful for a couple of reasons. It's very quick and easy to see it at a glance. It's simple to do, and it means that you can automate these faders to push more in or pull more level out of the signal processing that's going on here without affecting the actual balance of that kick drum too dramatically in the mix overall. So the theory being that you would do this for everything, so you'd go here and you'd say I've got a snare, and then you might do the same for your toms, do the same, sorry, for your toms. These are going to be stereo because they've got to be panned, so on and so forth. This is actually part of the toms as well, so you could drag that all in there. And then what we could do is we could solo up our drums by grabbing them all here. And we can see that that level's way too much going in there, because these kick drums, they've got some big hits on them. We've actually still got this up 7 dB. We should pull this back and just play this section here. Okay, so we can see that these levels are, they're hitting this group way too hard. So what we can do is we can solo up just our kick drum. We can get the balance between the mics we want. At a much more healthy level, we've got 8 dBs of headroom because these tracks aren't clipping. They're feeding this track here. And then you've got your actual balancing volume, your fader level in the mix, or how loud do I want my kick drum here. and that's completely independent of how you've gain staged it. So if I then put a compressor on, like the Pro C2, we can see that we're not hitting our compressor too hard now, and we've still got our headroom, and I can still change the gain staging at any point by pushing these faders up and driving more level in, or pulling them back and driving them out. And that's, like we talked about, these are like our small faders. You can imagine these coming after the gain preamp, going to the tape machine or to the next thing in the chain. Could be a compressor, could be an EQ, whatever it is that needs to receive a certain amount of level. And then this is like our large VCA fader, which is for our monitoring. It's what we hear back. And you could get really specific, like you hear people talking about some things like -18 or -16 and all the rest. Well, we can do that with a simple VU meter. If we know that our input of our analog model plugin, like a SSL compressor or something like that, wants to receive -18, because technically, or typically, sorry, most analog gear is modeled to receive -18 dB, then we can use our VU meter to check that we're not hitting this too hard, like so. So we can pull our levels down, we can hit play, we can bring the faders up until we see here in the red we're just getting -18. And there you are, hovering around -0.7 at -18, which means that when we hit our compressor now, it's doing its job and it's not being overloaded, and we've still got some of that headroom. In fact, you know, we could add more compression, do less, whatever it is, but we've got that set right so it's receiving that volume. There is a catch with this though, and it's different for transient material than it is for non-dynamic stuff like bass guitars or especially distorted electric guitars. So the rule of thumb that I follow is that my transient information, my drums, my kicks, my snares and so on, I don't really want them to be peaking more than -6. That means I've got 6 dBs of headroom. And you can apply the same thing to bass guitars and electric guitars and what have you, but anywhere between -10 and -6 on a VU meter, like your VU meters here in Pro Tools or whatever, is a pretty good rule of thumb. And there is one final quick way that you can do that. It's a bit rough and ready, but it does work. It gives you sort of an average. So you can see that these hits are fairly even. The drummer did a good job, he played well, he's quite consistent. So we can use our audio suite tools here, and we can go up to the tool, we find it in other, and it's under normalize. And if you grab normalize, what this is doing is it's analyzing the material and it's saying what peak do you want it to be, and I'm gonna try my best to make sure that I adjust it up or down so that the average, the majority of the peaks meet this and the overall level won't exceed this. So if I set -6, click on my piece of audio, hit render, we can see it actually turn it down quite a bit. And if I do the same with this one, -6, hit render, again it's turned it down. If I go somewhere here like the bass guitar, for example, where it's more of a heavy RMS signal, there's more low level stuff that's close to like loud things, and I hit render for -6, hasn't really changed it that much. But we can now see that those ones that we did do, they're hitting around that -6 part. And so that's another sort of useful way you can do it. I mean, you could set this to anything you want. You can have it to -10. If you really wanted, you could push it -4, but you want to give yourself some headroom. And that's kind of the name of the game, really. So hopefully those tips are handy. There's a bunch of ways you can do it. What's important to realize is that you need to choose a workflow and a method that gives you the flexibility to do your mix the way that you want. So, you know, for me, using this sort of small fader method where I can gain stage into a group, that's my preferred way of doing it, because then it's quick to see. I can also add processing to this if these aren't too loud or too heavily recorded, and I've still got my level set in the mix where I want it independent of my gain stage. And I can, if I'm starting to hit things too hard in here and I need to pull the gain back, I can literally just do that like that without changing anything here, and then I can compensate for the actual volume in the mix this way as well. Hopefully that helps. These are tips that I've been using, you know, over the years for my mixes, and they've worked really well for me. Experiment, watch the video back a couple of times, try each of them out, and yeah, happy mixing.